What's up, y'all? Welcome to Let's Fix Stories. We are missing the first third of our OG hosts today. Jared is busy, but I'm Jaylon. I am the editor-in-chief for One Brilliant Arc Media, and here with us today we do have Charles. Go ahead
Hello,
and...
hello, hello.
Yes, Charles is our other editor and
Yeah,
story...
sorry, the writer editor. I apologize, everyone. I've gone through many students today. If I am a little slow, just wait for me to catch up. I will catch up.
We're good. We're good. If I'm too fast, it's because I ingested way too much caffeine today, so no worries. And today we have a very special guest. This is Stacy. Thank you so much for being here. Stacy is a brave writer who is telling us about her story today, and we're going to chat about it. So go ahead and introduce yourself, Stacy, and tell us about why you chose to write this story.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy. First of all, thank you guys so much for having me. This is such an honor. I'm really excited to be featured on your podcast. So this is really exciting for me. So this story kind of came out in a series. It was a very weird, I guess, kind of how it all came out. I had enrolled in an MFA program online through Lindenwood University here in St. Charles, and everything was online. Everything had we had a weekly workshop, and it was my turn to submit. I had to submit a short story. So I had this little book of writing prompts, and it was funny because I was like, okay, what can I write about? And I wasn't really sure. And the writing prompt that I initially started this book off with was something about like somebody was stealing somebody's pudding cups. And like when I read that line, I thought, oh my gosh, one of my really close friends, we started teaching at a high school together the same time. Our classrooms were next to each other. He taught science. And I could just hear him saying that line. And I thought, okay. So I wrote a short story about basically he was coming in. He was trying to, if teachers can probably relate to this if anybody has known a teacher or taught. He was coming in at the last minute. He was trying to make his copies at the last minute. And, the copier gets jammed and all this stuff. And somebody ate his pudding cups out of the refrigerator. So it was a little short story just based on one little scene. And I submitted it to my online class, and it was critiqued, and it got good reviews or whatever. People kind of liked it. Well, then the pandemic hit, and I was at home by myself, and I had nothing to do. Like I literally wasn't going out anywhere. I was definitely taking the whole don't avoid everybody seriously. So I thought, okay, I need something to do. So I started writing, and at the time I was teaching high school. I taught high school English for about 10 years. And so at the time, it just kind of came to me. It was, I would just get up in the morning and sit down and, write for a couple hours. So it kind of evolved into this book. And so the book basically features me and then my friend who, I wrote the pudding cup story about. There was one other teacher that we were really close to. She was the art teacher. Our classrooms were all right in a row. So it kind of features the three different teachers. They're all kind of dealing with this crazy stuff at school. So some of the lines are lines that the kids really did said to me. For example, I once dropped my phone, my cat knocked my phone in the toilet, and I had it in a bag of rice on my desk, and the kids were like, well, just buy a new phone. Teachers make hella money. Every teacher has 3 jobs. And so it was things like that, little lines like that made it into the story fictitiously because I didn't write it as it actually happened, but I used some of those lines. So essentially it's fiction. These 3 teachers are kind of trying to make it through this crazy teaching high school, and they're trying to navigate their own love lives. In the end, everybody's happy. Everybody finds love, but they kind of go through some rocky adventures on the way.
I love how close to your personal experience and close to your heart the story is. I think that's something that's really special about stories in general is they show how they touch us in a very specific way, and then that's what empowers them to touch other people's lives too. So I'm curious if you can kind of walk us through a little bit what your vision for the story is, what your goals are, how you hope that it will touch people in specific ways. What your vision is there.
Really my vision, I think, was mostly to kind of entertain, because I think that we hear so much about teaching, and there were some very stressful times with teaching, but honestly, my favorite part was the kids. And I think when people hear oh, teaching, kids must be terrible, it's really not the kids that make it terrible. It's, other things, but I enjoyed the kids. And so everything that I put in my story was used, I guess, for lack of a better term, with love. I mean, I had even students that would make these snarky comments. I use those comments in my story, to use them humorously. So I think first and foremost, the story is supposed to just be entertaining, and just kind of, I guess kind of like a heartfelt story. Cause like I said, in the end, everybody does, And you can see even through some of these comments that the kids say in the story, even though they are, like I said, used fictitiously, you can see their love, for the teachers and stuff in the story. So I think first and foremost, like I said, it was really just kind of to be lighthearted and to entertain. And I would love, of course, this is, for this to turn into a published book eventually. Currently, right now, what I have altogether is about 61,000 words. So, it's hopefully on the right track. But I would say mostly a form of entertainment.
Awesome. And just to catch up the audience a little bit, if you're curious, for the review for today, we're going to be applying what we talk about in our other podcast, Let's Talk Stories, to Stacy's book. And we're going to just kind of walk through what makes a good story, what can make it even better. And we have only read the first 10K words of her 61K words. So we have a sample to work off of, and we'll let her fill in the synopsis of what happens when we start talking about the story structure. So yeah, that's the general gist of what we're going to jump into. So
Really
go
quick,
ahead. Yeah,
the
go ahead.
title is what again?
I'm sorry.
The title of the book is?
Oh, right. The title. The title is called This Wasn't in the Handbook.
Which I absolutely love. I do really like that title.
Thank you. I struggled with the title and I changed the character's name so many times. It's funny, how, and then finally it just clicked. I was like, okay, that's definitely it.
Yep. It is interesting when you get to know your characters. They really do become their own people, and it's a process of getting to know them the same way that you would get to know someone in real life, where it sometimes is very slow. But then once you start recognizing, once you start knowing them very well, it's just something clicks and you're like, that's them. That's who they are.
Yeah.
So
Very much so.
all right, well, let's jump into, we go through our Spark method because that's a really cool thing that Jared came up with, and it helps us stay focused because we all like to just start chatting and go down rabbit holes. So we're going to start with talking about the setup. The first question I will ask, and I'll shoot it to Charles first for his opinion. Does the story start strong? And is the premise, genre, and world clear from the jump?
Yeah, so I was gonna say, the way it's toned, it did feel, um, what's the phrase? I think the phrase I'm trying to say is natural, and by natural I mean our world is not always a cartoon, and it's not always a dark drama. Usually it's like somewhere in the middle,
Mhm.
which is very realistic, and I felt that, and I dug that. And really quick, just to make sure, Janela, could you repeat that question? Because I want to make sure I'm getting this right.
General question, does the story start strong?
Does the story start strong? Okay, so yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It did because I knew I got the gist teaching. Okay, great. And it started before the school year. I thought that was really, really smart. And I will say the strongest element that I picked up of what's the way I operate, Stacy, is basically I try to find the hooks of a piece that are purely you, purely original, purely from you, and try to grow the tree up until it's a strong, mighty plant. That's metaphor. I speak in metaphor, sorry everyone. But
Perfect.
that's how I focus. And the thing I really dug about this was that instead of jumping right into the opening of the school year, opening day, you can just see the cinema version, the kids screaming, nah, 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 they run to the school. None of that. Making it summer vacation, first of all, automatically has a sense of choking. Oh no, it's coming. The children, they're coming. That's interesting on a suspense level. But it also did frame the teachers as people. And I thought that was the one, not the only thing that worked. Not that's not the case, but it was the thing that I noticed and I said that is something to build up on because instead of framing them as purely teachers, it felt to me like they were people who taught, which I thought was interesting and different. So it automatically clicked in my head that way. So yeah, most definitely.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. I didn't actually think about that, but that wasn't, like my purpose for doing it that way. But I'm happy to hear that. And you said something that kind of reminded me of the first question you guys asked was about how it wasn't supposed to be like people aren't all serious or all, all craziness, and that was kind of the purpose of kind of what I wanted everyone to see with the book. So I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you.
I agree with this, and I think it's really funny because I've seen this with every single writer I have ever worked with. When I work on developmental edits with them, there's always the bones of the story just instinctively there that are in the writing, even at the very earliest stages, and then it's just a process of whittling it down to make the bones really stand out and to highlight the through lines that the pieces are all there, you just have to rearrange them the right way. So I think that's something really interesting that I always love to see with the writers that I work with. My thoughts on kind of jumping off what Charles said, I think that the setting is very clear from the beginning, and in one sense, it's really great because it's easy to make our contemporary world familiar. It's very easy to introduce that. Um, But the challenge that comes with that is making the familiar interesting. So when I was looking at the very first paragraph and thinking, your first goal when you are writing a story, when you write your first sentence, your first goal should be make it interesting enough that someone wants to read the second sentence. And then from the second sentence, make it interesting enough that they want to read the third, and so on. So I was looking at the first sentence and I was thinking, I almost wish that it started with a slightly stronger hook because you really do want to lean into making the familiar feel familiar and yet also new and interesting. So I started thinking, what would happen if you started it with the sentence of Esme clutching her phone to her ear, trying not to get sweat and sunscreen on it? Because first of all, that's something that we all deal with, but no one has bothered to describe before. So I think that it shows a very authentic introduction that immediately hooks people because they say, "Oh, I've been there. I've done that. I've never seen someone validate that experience by describing it before." Um, so there's a thought that I'm throwing out to you. You can think about it, think what you'll do with it. But yeah, it is very interesting to see the contemporary world written in fictional stories because you can immediately make it feel familiar to people and you can immediately make them understand what you're describing. Um, and then it's just how do you make the familiar feel new and interesting?
Okay. I like that. That's a really good idea. I did struggle with that. It's so funny that you say that because I did kind of struggle with that scene because I thought, okay, she's at the pool, like, who really cares? So I did kind of struggle with how to, I guess, how to draw people in and then how to make it seem as if like already there was conflict going on. So I do like that suggestion. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that my goal is always to ask enough questions to know that I'm on the right track of understanding what you're trying to do with the story and what you're actually trying to say. And then yeah, we'll just help pick out those bones that we're highlighting and connecting the through lines. So, next question, talking about your setup, is do we understand what the protagonist wants, even if it's subconscious? And there's several protagonists in this story. There's several POVs that we see from. So everyone had their own opening chapter, which was another really cool thing that I thought you did well finding that balance. But yeah, Charles, what were your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I did. It's interesting because I was I was reading the Esme section and I picked up on the marriage, the move, this, and I was like, it doesn't necessarily sound like the hottest thing in the world. And the way it was developed, I'm like, it's not the hottest thing in the world. Okay, yeah, good. And then you also have, I am so sorry, I am drawing a blank on the other character's name. And for the record, if I do forget certain details like that, I apologize. Anyone can tell you I'm bad with names, good with faces. So, Ava, thank you.
I
Sorry.
am too. That's okay.
Okay. With Ava, it was the same thing of the sense of it's a traditional bad date gone wrong thing. Her, when she spies Esme, and I want to loop back around to that later because I thought there was something very interesting there too. When she loops with Esme, it's a connection of trying to find a group of people to survive these little things. And I thought that was an interesting detail. So the same with Zachary, that sense of he jumps with Esme at the training, they're already on board. I felt it was trying them to just find something a little bit nicer, a little bit better than the either mundaneness or the uncomfortableness of their daily life. So I picked that up quite clearly. And again, that I thought was interesting because usually with teaching stuff, it's about the teaching, which is totally fine. And
Mhm.
that's cool. And you can eat your cake and have it too. But in this case, at least in these first six chapters, yeah, 6 chapters,
Mhm.
I got the impression that it was a little bit more about the people, again, who taught. And I thought that was interesting, where it's like, usually it would be, I want to be the best teacher in the best world. And that's fine. You can do that all the live long day. But I thought here was a little bit more about trying to find um, connection to be a little less crummy in their lives. And I thought that was very interesting with this teaching backdrop.
Mm, yeah.
Oh, good.
My thoughts, and this is where I'm gonna ask you a question. Am I correct in picking up on all of the protagonists? What they all struggle with is not falling into letting life happen to them, but happening to life, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think that's a really good way to describe it, and that's funny that you say that. I'm glad you got that because, like later on, much later on, Ava meets a friend of hers for coffee before work, and that's kind of how she ends up being like her little love interest. But she actually has a conversation with her friend, and she just says like, "Everyone's doing all this stuff but me," and the friend is trying to reassure her. So I'm really glad that came out because she does have that conversation later on. So good, thank you.
Awesome. I'm glad that I picked up correctly on that. I will say I kind of wanted it to come across a little bit clearer in the opening chapters for each of the characters because I think it's something so powerful to hit on because so many people experience the same struggle. I mean, we all have a hard time seeing ourselves as the main character in our own stories, in our own lives, because our lives do feel mundane. It does feel like, we're just in this familiar cycle and life is just happening to us. And we're just, hanging on for the ride. So I think it would be really interesting to find a way to very clearly state that from in each of the characters' voices at the beginning,
Okay.
and make that really highlight that because I feel like that's going to be, and again, another question: am I correct in guessing that that is your main theme throughout the book?
I would say for sure that it's definitely one of the main themes, absolutely, because they do all three kind of feel like, they're just kind of stuck here, like they're stuck in life, they like, they can't, they're not, succeeding in their romantic lives. Their work is kind of, it's been very stressful. So I think that is for sure absolutely one of the main themes. I think there's kind of quite a few, but that's absolutely one of the main ones for sure.
Fair. All right. So perfect. So in your first few chapters, make sure that you really highlight those themes and state them for each character because that's going to be everyone's going to see the purpose in your beginning chapters from the get-go and see that they need to keep reading to see how this problem solves. It's the stating the problem, stating the struggle, so then you hook your audience to be like, oh, how are they going to solve this problem? Because I struggle with this problem too, so I want to know how I can solve this problem. Uh,
Okay.
that's immediately going to get someone to continue reading your book because it impacts their lives. So that's an easy way of answering the question, like, why should I read your book? It's because we all need to figure this out in our own lives. So,
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. That's very good advice. Thank you.
so that kind of leads into progression. We're going to talk about, is the story moving forward with purpose? I'm going to combine the second question with this first question because I feel like it's a follow up. Are scenes escalating tension, emotion, or stakes? Charles,
This
I'm
is
going to throw it to you first.
Yeah. I did like a lot of it because I was noticing so Esme's first chapter, made total sense. Okay, got it. But I was wondering, I'm like, when we jump to a different character, I was like, okay, this is interesting, but where's the thread? Is there a thread? If not, why, etc., etc. And when they start meeting in this um, restaurant diner, I'm drawing a blank on the word right now. Um, I was like, oh, okay, there's the connection of again they're common people, and that's why I want to loop back on that. When I was like, wasn't Esmond going to a restaurant? Why are we jumping to this lady? And I was like, oh, okay, no, I see it. There's the thread
Mhm.
of the connection, not in the sense of um no, no, actually, I was gonna almost say meet cute, but to be honest, if you are going for a more positive tone, you can totally do that sort of thing, which I will say would be very interesting because again, usually people will think, oh, dramas only have to be the worst, sitcom comedy on television that you've ever seen or the most hardcore theater drama. But you can do something like that of something like you would say a rom-com because I like rom-coms and I think that does work and it's an underrated tone. But that's a side detail for thematic aesthetic conversations. But here I did think it progressed because I'm seeing how they are connected. And so then slowly building up to the school material, I thought really, really worked. Because you were seeing them again as people, but seeing the similarities between them. And I thought that was really interesting. So when we were jumping between them, it didn't feel like, like terrible 2010s television. Here's plot A, here's plot B, and you're like, you have 20 minutes, hurry up, I'm bored.
Right.
It felt more like showing the similarities between them. And I thought that was a very meaningful point. So I did think that worked. The one thing I will say is I know I think it was Ava's second chapter. Was it the second chapter? There was some section of Ava I thought did not add as much material, almost like it's like almost like it was two chapters that could have been one. I cannot remember what it was specifically. I want to see if I wrote a note here. I apologize for my again shakiness on.
No, that's okay. I have a
Oh
guess as
no,
to
I'm
what it might
sorry.
be, and I'm curious what you'll say because I have a
Okay.
guess as to what I think the chapter might be. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say I think it was her cleaning her classroom, which by the way, I thought was rather funny because I made a note about where it's like, oh, everything was clean, and I've had to help my sister who teaches middle school for several years clean her classroom at the beginning and the end of the year, and I was thinking, she always complains that they're like, no, we won't touch your classroom for summer school, and then the kids
Yep.
come in and they can let her do whatever she wants. She gets to clean up. So I was gonna make a note. I'm like, when it was clean, I was like, I'm not exactly sure that's. And then there was there. I was like, oh, okay, so very solid. Yeah. So you tricked me in a very positive way, but I cannot remember what it was exactly. But I think I'm gonna go back on my comment because I think introducing this other teacher solved that problem. But I did feel there was some section like that was a little slower when I thought I was a little bit ready to go into it. But otherwise, I think as a whole, I do think the pacing is going into the doomsday, as it were, of the start of the school year, and I thought that was solid. So
Okay, good. That was my guess. There's another chapter, and I'll be interested to see, Jalen, what you say because there is a another chapter I thought of Esme's that I thought it seems like it could just be kind of dragging along. So I'm kind of interested to see what you guys say. But the other teacher that's introduced is kind of like the mean teacher. There's always like that one teacher at school that's like mean to everybody and like throwing away into the bus. So, and I think I forgot to mention this in the beginning. She later loses her job because she's stealing money from the prom fund. But she was like introduced there as like a she's kind of like just talking down to everybody and like very rude to everybody, and she does come back later in some later chapters, and people are just kind of like, oh my god, like why, what is her issue? So that was kind of the purpose of introducing her there then, but I did think that part did kind of drag a little bit, and so like I said, Jillian, I'm interested to see what you have to say because I have another part that I thought I could do away with, but I'm not sure. So
Okay, so I have a very interesting perspective on this. I found it. Well, first I'll go back to what Charles was saying about like the tension of the school year building is starting was very, very good. It kept me reading because there was that tension of, as Charles said, the children are coming, the children are coming. Um, and, I relate to that. I have also helped my dad clean out his classroom after, the chaos of school year, and then it just gets locked up for the summer.
right,
Um, and then, having to go back to it, and just you have that mental countdown of the dread of, your mundane days and the craziness at the same time is going to start again very soon. So I think that was a really great plot device that you used of that tension, that countdown of the first day of school. It did keep me reading and keep me interested as to how this was all going to work out once school did start. Um, so I really appreciated that. Going back to what I said about it's sometimes very tricky to make the familiar things interesting. And again, this might be a personal perspective thing. Someone else might not have this same note because they don't share the same perspective I do. Um, I felt like some of the paragraphs I wanted to move faster because since I have a father for a teacher, since I understand that world, I felt like I already knew. My brain was trying to do the thing where it says, you already know everything you need to know about what's going on here from this one sentence. You don't need to read the next three. Um,
Okay.
so that was an interesting note for pacing for me, and that might be a personal thing just because, again, I'm familiar with this world and this lifestyle. Um, so it may have just been my brain tricking myself into saying you can skim here because you already understand. But the little hints that you dropped, so like for, as Charles was saying, with Esme's marriage to Josh, you had some really good hints that you dropped where there was a little bit of an unspoken thing that we picked up on. And that was very great for escalating the emotional tension because that made me say, oh, there's something here that I don't know about. And I want to keep reading because I want to know about it. So using those elements of mystery was a really great thing that you did. And I saw it when Ava met Andy.
Mhm.
And so that was one of the most interesting parts to me because you said something about how Ava thought something was weird or off about Andy, and I felt it too as I was reading. I was like, yeah, something isn't
Good.
quite right. And it made me want to keep reading because I was like, I wonder how this is going to develop down the road. I want to know what's actually going on here. So I actually thought that was a really great scene. I thought that it should have definitely been included because that was one of the scenes that really nailed tension and made me want to keep reading to find the mystery to the unspoken thing that was kind of spoken but not really spoken, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Good. Thank you. And that's really interesting to hear that because when I had sent it to a friend of mine and my fear was like, okay, so it's interesting that you say that, just because like you have the background of like knowing about teaching. My fear was like, okay, nobody else is going to want to read this because it's all about teaching. So now it's interesting to hear you say that okay, I already know this. So I think, and now that you say that, almost everybody knows a teacher, has heard about teaching, has heard teachers complaining about teaching. So I do think you're right that there can be some of that stuff probably can be taken out. That's a really good point. Thank you. Yeah.
And then going back to talking about stakes, I'm curious about, Charles, what your thoughts are here. Because, again, the theme is they're trying to not let life happen to them and instead happen to life. So, highlighting that theme, you do want to present in the very beginning that they aren't um, they aren't good at happening to life. They're more just, at the beginning stages of their arc where life is just happening to them. But I'm curious if, Charles, you have any specific ideas on how to highlight what's at stake from the very beginning chapters for each of these characters. Because, for example, when we're talking about Esme's her relationship with Josh, you think uh, she alludes to wanting to stay home to make sure that nothing fishy happens with the in-laws because the in-laws are typical in-laws and want to show up and meddle in things. But then she has the psychological need of I need to be doing something. I need to be doing my job and finding a job, working, and that is a definitely a psychological need that again I can relate to. Um, so I wonder if we can state very specifically in a clever way what's at stake if she doesn't fulfill both of these needs.
Yeah. I will say something, and this will kind of tie into the next section of our Spark form, but we'll open it up here. Is I think one specific way to do it that I was seeing in the text, and so I know it's there. We just have to again cut some other elements and let the good plants grow more. Um, is it's the details in the characters' heads that I feel I've read really good stories like this. I've seen not so great stories like this. Um, and I've learned this just a lot of practice that when you're stressed about something, you think about it a lot and a
Mhm.
lot and a lot and a lot. So basically meeting an in-law doesn't become just yeah, they're annoying. That's really frustrating. It's every single word they say is reflective of the problem. So something I actually really liked um, when Esme meets her in-laws was this nervous laugh that her mother-in-law has. And I was like, that's very exact. I know exactly how that feels because it's that little laugh that grates your skin. But to that end, you can highlight that by saying, you can emphasize that it's not just a nervous laugh. It's this nervous laugh that gets under her skin, that starts reminding. So when she's looking for something, like looking for a job or the call, she can think about that laugh or think about this look. Because when you're doing that, it's kind of like when I've learned this, when people are very stressed, it's almost like every time they go forward, there's this rear view mirror that's looking back on the other stuff that happened to them. And that stuff in the back, like an oncoming car on your rear, is judging you, commenting on you, even though you're trying to move forward. But I think if you add those little details, it builds up everything. It's kind of a weird example, but it's almost like Lego pieces. When you have a Lego set, you have these big foundational pieces, but it's these little details, little flowers, a little pig figurine, or this or that, that make it into a farm instead of just a bunch of Lego pieces. I was noticing details like that, and I feel if you press them further, it will make them appear in the characters more, and the stakes will be naturally clear because you never have to go, she needed this, she needed that. You can just have her really need one thing and have the audience pick up she really needs it, because you can tell in the text there's a desperation, and they start to the wheels in their head start turning and they start making threads. So that would be my advice.
I love how you worded that because that's something I didn't even think about how to put into words, is that anxiety of, the what's in the rear view mirror constantly judging you and always thinking about it. That is a very good way. I'm learning how to create stakes in a clever way because, yeah, you see that desperation of this is what I'm going to be stuck in if nothing changes. So, all right, well, Charles, you kind of teased this next section, our attachment section. Do we care about the characters? Are we emotionally or intellectually invested?
Okay. So in this case, for me, the answer is yes, and it's no, but the no is, you gotta shrink it. So stick with me here. What I mean is, I get these folk, and honestly, it's interesting. With Esme, for me, the quick marriage, I was like, that's very interesting, and I want to know more about that. The move to a different place, I also relate to for a lot of personal reasons. But the thing that really clicked for me is this moment of which she tried to have an application, and it wasn't. They like this technical term, and she just wanted to cry because it's like, how could you do the technical term? I've done that before a million times, so I understand that feeling. Same with her getting way too early, and she's in the her car, and the same with Ava dealing with this stupid teacher. I love the phrase, she said something, can you help, and instantly regretted it. I totally get that. Um, so those little details. And the other thing too is very invested in wanting to know why Zachary thinks it's safer to go back and teach at his old high school. Because for me, just teaching kids again, because I used to teach um, college students, tutor college students and high school students. Now I'm teaching kids specifically. It makes me feel just um very anxious, like I'm retro going backwards. Um, so I would love to see more of that develop. The little no is, as of right now, I feel on the page they're not. I feel like there's a little bit of a door, and I can't find the key for the door to get more into their heads, which mainly ties not into the content, but the technical presentation. Which is what I was already kind of mentioning, that I feel if certain sentences, certain word phrases, certain word choices get um, not spiced up, that's not the right word, but I think, or phrasing, I think if they get a little bit more personal and a little bit more intimate, there's the word I'm looking for. Um, we can get a little bit more in their heads. Um, so the thing that I was thinking of, for example, this is the first example I did. And to be fair, keep in mind, this what I'm about to share, I just came right out the words. I didn't really check it. It was just a general example. But this is kind of what I'm saying here. And again, you can tweak it, etc., etc. This is just my general spirit of advice. So for the sentence of describing Esme, a reading from the text said, born and raised in Florida, Esme had moved to the Midwest 2 months ago after her husband Josh, who had lost his job shortly after he had gotten married, was conveniently only able to find a job in the town in which he had grown up, a suburb of a larger city. So I thought about that and I said, what is a way? Oh, tears filled Esme's eyes and she blinked them away. That's what the kick was. So I was like, she's clearly having trouble being, and I related that. So what I suggested um, was a slight rewrite, but specifically what I'm trying to note here is, again, and this is not me tooting my own horn. That's not what this is about. What I'm trying to emphasize is you can try and get those little details to make her a little bit more not interesting. That's not the term, because everyone's interesting. The people you'll make will be interesting, but we can understand them more because I can see the beating heart, but I want to get to the beating heart. So what I suggested was tears fill Esme's eyes and she made herself blink them away. The town name, I couldn't remember the town name where I didn't see it, was not Florida, where she was born, married, and had planned to be buried. Then, Josh lost his job so soon after the wedding and came to her one night with news only he rejoiced to hear. They would be all right because he found work in his hometown, just outside of St. Louis. Out here in the Midwest, far from, I said Seminole land because I was connecting that maybe she would know about that, about her Florida land she held so dear. Now that's not necessarily the best way to do it, and that's not does not have to be the way to do it. But I noted that change specifically because if it was me again, if I'm looking at this, I'm trying to edit it and strengthen it. You can have Esme's pain of this longing that she doesn't want to be here. This is an alien place. She needs to go to Florida. She understands that place. And it makes her sad that you can emphasize those little teeny details like that and get into this working mind and heart of hers. Because the mind has anxious thoughts and logical thoughts, and the heart has longings and knowledge that it tries to balance with. And I think if you can put those details into the text, just a little bit more, or not even just a little bit more, but like really, shift gears here and go forward with them, I think it'll be really even stronger. The second detail to that end, I'm sorry, I'm talking way too much.
Yeah.
The second detail was the one thing I noted here too. Actually, I have the other ones here. Was for Ava. I think Ava's date. I wanted her to stand up a little bit more to this guy. Or if she didn't, I wanted her to just kind of go like, like when someone says something and you have a comeback only 20 minutes later, that kind of thing. Because I felt that there was something, the way she came at the date, it just felt, I'm like, she's smarter than this. She's got to know that she is falling into this stupid thing. But why is that the case? And I wanted her to have a little. She, I felt the guy ran her over, but I felt just listening to her because none of it surprised her. And she played it smart that I thought she could have some kind of equality against it, like kind of even the ground against it because she had a more working brain about it. And the same thing kind of with Zachary is I really wanted to know why does he think it's safe um, to be in that sense. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, and thank you for coming to my TED Talk, everyone. But I think if you dig in to the personal elements from a technical perspective and just start adding more details to them that are the most personal, I think it will be really fantastic. The final point, there is one sentence that one section, one phrase, I have to find it, that I made a note and I said, um, that was like, this is precisely what we're looking for. Let me see if I can find it. I cannot. I'll find it in just a moment. So, Jaylon, you
You'll
can
have to
take.
try it later, come back. I was going to say a very similar thing, but in a different way. I see how emotionally I care about these people because what they struggle with is all very familiar to me. So like the nervous laughter, the you have immediate anxiety seeing the dog hair and the dust on the floor from your judgmental in-laws perspective and bracing for that comment, that offhand comment. Um, the sunscreen and the sweat, trying not to get on the phone thing, um, feeling dismissed when you need support in taking a brave step like filling out a resume and you feel dismissed or um, you don't have the full attention of the person who's supposed to be your partner in life who's sitting next to you and has something better to do than to care about your feelings. Um, those are all things that I could understand emotionally, and I immediately cared about the character because I could relate to those little things. So I was going to say I definitely see places where you emotionally and intellectually draw people into these characters with their relatable struggles. And I think that you should see how well you do that and continue to lean into that because that's what really hooked me. That's what really kept me reading and kept me caring about what happens to these characters and how they can change so that they can overcome what they're struggling with in life and they can feel like they can make that out loud comeback to this date that's completely running over them and being a total meanie head about it. Um and they can find it within themselves to make that comeback out loud and put them in their place.
I did find the section I was looking for. The sentence is, at her age, everyone was already married with kids, and she was starting to think the leftovers were left over for a reason. I said, that is a very poetic phrase, very solid, but that you can just, it can be watered down and just say, like, and nobody wanted her. But that's not interesting. You said it in leftovers for a reason, and that's a personal bit. That's how someone thinks about themselves. A very specific word choice, very specific poetic choice. It is both technically very interesting, but it is also emotionally much more resonant than, say, if you had used a more common kind of terminology. So there you go.
So round of applause there. Another round of applause is I think you created tonally diverse characters, which can be very difficult, but again, you can tell that you've sat with these people for a while and you've got to know them, and each person sounded different in their point of view. So that's something that I noticed that I really appreciated.
Okay, good, because I really struggle with that. And like I said, the characters were, I think I said this, the characters were kind of based on me and then, two of my friends. And so Zachary, like he is based off my friend Eric, and Eric and I are really good friends. Like to this day, he's actually in my wedding next month. And so like he is tried to write him very true to how he said, he's so funny. Like in real life, he's just so funny. So I tried to write him like to say things and things that I thought he would think and say, like true to life. But it was very hard. I felt like, especially since we are all teachers, and it was hard to like kind of get that different tone down. So I'm glad that it came across because I honestly wasn't sure if it did. So thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay, so I guess we'll move on to resonance. And this is more of a question for you to answer, Stacey. I want to hear it from you. What's the story really about beneath the plot? This is kind of digging into theme a little bit, but the question is just what's the story really about?
So I think, I mean, it's really about kind of, a little bit like I said earlier, just kind of about like these people who are teachers. They are human and they do, go through these experiences. And a lot of it, I think, and again, this was kind of just based on, the character that's supposed to be like me, kind of, was just taking that leap, to get out of your misery and to take the leap and take a risk, I guess. So don't just settle for, what you think is going to be the best thing, or what you think is like the, your um, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Don't settle, I guess basically. Don't settle for something that makes you unhappy, Um, in the towards the end of the book, when she ends up leaving the husband, she her friend from Florida calls her and says like, well, you can always come back. And she ends up liking her job. She ends up really liking the kids, and she like enjoys the school, even though she struggles with some stuff. But her friend calls her, and she's telling her like, I'm leaving him. And the first thing the friend says, well, you can come live with me. And she's like, yeah, but it's not going to be like when we were 14. We're not going to be eating ice cream and watching movies. Like, you're married, it's different now. And so she kind of has to like make her own way. And then she realizes, in the end, that she does like being there. She did have to take quite a pretty big leap, to get there, but she does enjoy. So I think it's mostly about kind of not settling and not just letting yourself feel like you're here and you're stuck.
I like that. Again, a very that's the bones, that's the key message that people are going to they'll walk away from the book with it. It's going to be a story that sticks with them because they have something to take away from it that will personally impact their own lives and show them how they can develop in that way. So Charles, the question for you is, do you feel like this theme came through in what you read?
Yeah, I think it's a little hard to find it here simply because it's the first 6 chapters. You do need a through line, and I'll get to that. But I think it's a little hard to find that because it hasn't naturally developed. But I will say yes, because um well, I say this this is a good thing. Part of the story did remind me in the similar taste and tone of Waitress, which is a musical I really love. Um, but it had a similar thing of being trapped, wanting something. But of what I think it mostly really came out because, again, I couldn't understand why Ava was clearly smart. Clearly, this was not a good idea, but why did she do it? And smart people do stupid things like that all the time. But so it was not. It's not a critique on her, but it was why did she do it? And the answer is because trying to just throw something at a wall, even if you know it's not going to stick, trying. And the
Yeah.
same thing with Esme of just knowing um, when she's going to the school, it felt like have to do this, have to do this, have to try, have to try. Um, Zachary again, I wanted a little bit more because I got so stuck on him going back to the school, but it's the same thing of him going forward. He's still there and still having more of an upbeat nature, and I
Mhm.
so that was definitely there. Um, of seeing that material, and I think it was mostly interesting because I will say the thing that really clicked with me in terms of being trapped. So you're talking about leaving the husband. I thought that was interesting because I saw Josh and I was like, okay, kind of seen this before. And again, even when I say that, by the way, there is very, very simple ways to find the spark, even in such a phrase. So nothing is the most if something is common, I've seen it before, that's a starting point.
Mhm.
Um, the issue is if it just kind of stays there. I think you can build it up more. But in any case, the real kick though was when I read that, I'm like, moving back to a hometown, being so fast, they just got married. That kind of element, I thought, stuck in my head of being stuck. And going backwards. So, which by the way, maybe that is actually a real thing to click on because that's about the third time I've said that. Um, Zachary going back to the school that he worked at. Josh has forced her to go back to the hometown he was in. I've mentioned my own feelings about that, so that might be something too. And I really do think I like that you said of a preview of the rest of the story that she can't go back to Florida, and have to go back to the old days. So that might actually the answer the answer is yes, I do get that, but that now that I think about it, that might be something to dig more into because I think if I keep saying it all the time, it's not coming from nowhere. Um,
Yeah, so that's really interesting, and I'm glad you said that because so originally in the first several drafts, I mean, I have gone through this like at least 10 times, probably keep adding stuff, and so one of the last revisions I did, so in the end, the mean teacher is like Andy, is it comes out that she's stealing money from the prom fund. Well, one of the kids she tries to frame like one of the kids, and then she tries to say like, oh, it could be the janitor. And so the only reason is because of this line. The only reason I put Zachary like going back to this school, because I thought it kind of made sense for him to be in that hometown still, but also because she says, well, the janitor was in here, and he was like, oh, that guy's worked here since I was since I was here. I doubt it. He's like 80 years old. He's got grandkids. He's not stealing money. So then I was like, okay. So then I added it. So I had to add him. So I had to change him a little bit to make him, kind of go back to his old school. And like I said, he needed a reason to be at that bar that night. So um, that's interesting. Okay, I like that is actually very helpful. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, finding those things to highlight. I think again, this is kind of expounding on what I was saying about the stakes. When you start going through and you can have a fresh set of eyes, because I mean, when you've been through it so many times, you kind of become blind to what you've instinctively put in there as this is what
Yes,
matters about my story.
yes,
So having an extra set of eyes is where it's really helpful, because someone can just read it and be like, "Oh, that's what stuck with me. That's what we need to highlight more."
yes.
So when I was talking about building up the stakes, when you have a theme, the theme that's the through line that you're trying to highlight, at the end in your resolution, it's easier to mention the theme. But at the beginning, you can still clue readers in by asking the right questions and framing the right struggles. So tapping into that desperation of feeling trapped, being backwards, being stuck. Um, that's presenting a problem that needs to be solved with your theme in the story. So when you present that as one of the first unspoken things that a reader clues into and latches onto, they're going to easily connect it to, once you get to your resolution, oh, this is what this story was really about. So great job. You've got the bones there. Just lean into highlighting them and really digging into what's going to stick with people about the story, what actually makes this story matter, what makes someone have to read my story in order to improve their own lives.
Yes, that's really helpful. Thank you. That line right there, to improve their own lives. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Next question. So, I mean, we kind of already touched on, is there something sticking with us after reading? Charles said what stuck with him. So, we kind of went through all that. So, I guess we'll move on to killer moments. What's working really well? What lines, scenes, or ideas hit hard? I saved this specific line scene for the last. I didn't mention it until now because I really wanted to bring it up as part of your killer moments. I have a phobia of snakes. I'll say that. Um, so
Right.
I deeply related to Esme's disgust. Um, and I really loved the line where at the end of the chapter, she's just really disgusted by by Josh picking up the snake and putting it around his neck. And first of all, like, same sister. But also, the very specific line, this is another, like, what you did well in the line Charles mentioned, you also did it well in this line. Where she's like, what kind of person puts his pet snake around his neck? And then she said, more, what kind of person marries a man who lets his snake hang around his neck? And immediately it clued me into, well, first of all, there were lots of moments in your writing where I noticed your snark and your sarcasm, and I deeply appreciated that. I love that.
Good. It's supposed to be yours. I'm glad you saw that. Thank you.
I loved it. But in this line specifically, like, not only is it snarky and makes you chuckle, but it also shows something deeper in Esme, where it clues you into, oh, she regrets a decision that she made. There might be a little bit of regret or second guessing this decision that she made to marry him. And that was a very interesting thing that clued me into, oh, there's a problem here, and we're gonna have to figure out how to solve it. So there you go.
Good.
I will
Thank you.
also say to that end, as an additional note, I think having him have a snake makes him more interesting than just the common uh, coat, as it were, that he has right now. To that end, um, as just a side, just a side deal, I wanted to throw this out there because I was looking at this with editorial and eyes. I think um, one thing when he's playing video games and they're trying to have a conversation, I don't know if you did this on purpose, but if this is set in the modern time, if Josh has a video game with a game controller that has a cord, he's playing an older system, which would be reflective of him. But to that end, I think it would be interesting if he was playing a fantasy RPG because most people would say it's got to be a first person shooter. This is true. But in modern video game circles, goodness gracious me, people just play Skyrim, Baldur's Gate 3, and another game which his name escapes me right now. But I bring this up to say that because of that snake, suddenly my brain thinks maybe he is playing an older RPG because he's the kind of guy who would still play something from 20 years ago. So I bring this up to say follow those little threads and you will make the characters a little bit more interesting because your brain's already put them in there, the threads. So just follow them forward. But simply put, the killer moment that I have, I really, really just liked when Ava and Esme smiled and waved at each other. And I really compliment that because, one, it's really nice in general, but it clicked because it was that sense of that I was building in the material. But I also liked it because I feel in another technical iteration of the story, it kind of would be like, again, like a meet cute. And meet cutes are fine, but I felt it would be a meet cute without value. In here, it did feel like it had value. It did feel natural and simplistic, just catching each other's eye and just waving, saying, smiling. There was it worked, which I'm saying that it is through your writing that it worked. So this goes back to what I'm saying of finding those pieces and building them up. Um, I have a lot of notes here on that angle of building up those notes, so they're definitely there. I think it works really, really well. That was the bit that really, really stuck in my head the most because I could see it and I could feel it. So
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's the end of the questions that we have, but do you have any specific questions for us, Stacy, or anything that you feel like we didn't cover, anything that kind of said in a weird way we need to clarify? Any other thoughts you
I really don't think so. You guys, I took a lot of notes. You guys covered so much stuff. This was so helpful. This was really great. Now I'm really excited to go work on it again. I'm kind of motivated to work on it again.
have? Okay.
The one thing I did stick in my mind, and when we were talking about like lines we could take out, and obviously, I mean, without reading the whole book, I don't know if this even matters, but like when Esme goes to the interview, I felt like that chapter was kind of long, or like the beginning when she goes to the interview and she's like couldn't figure out how to get inside the school and everything is like new. Did that chapter, like I guess the point of the chapter was supposed to be kind of like she's at this school and like we're supposed to get like a sense of the chaos. Do you think that interview scene kind of helped us see how chaotic the school is really going to be, or was it just something that could have been cut out?
I definitely felt the chaos from it. And
Okay.
I think in my head I was asking the right questions I think that you were going to answer later of why does this feel so crazy? Why does this feel
Right.
so weird? What's the point of, spending so much time in this awkward space? So,
Okay.
mm,
Okay, good, because that definitely does kind of come to play later when we see like stuff that happens at the school and like the stuff the kids do and stuff. It's all kind of chaotic. So okay, good, thank you.
yeah, the
No, I think that
weirdness
was
of it.
really it. This was really helpful.
Yeah,
Charles, did you have another thought?
I was
I'm
just gonna
sorry.
say the weirdness did help. If you're worried about it going on too long, try to see because something I've noticed in my own writing and other readings and other editorial work I've done, sometimes a scene doesn't go on for too long. It's just the technical presentation's too long. So maybe instead of having a sentence, for example, with 10 words, see if you can chop it down to 6 or 4.
Okay.
You can keep the content, just make it go a little bit faster. And that
Mhm.
might help you be able to keep your cake and eat it too.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
Yep. I think that would have also helped my brain in like it would have made it sit down and be like, no, you have to read this as opposed to saying, no, you already know this, you can skip. So
Okay. Okay. Good. That's helpful. Thank you. Good.
well, thank you so much. I really want to tell you how grateful we are because I know as a writer myself, it is really hard to not only put your heart and soul into writing something and share it with the world, but it's really hard to share it with the purpose of getting critiques, even if you know it's to make it better. So I just want to really honor your bravery, your courage in not only coming up with the story, telling the story that's so close to your heart, but also putting in the work to make it the best it can be, because I think that it's definitely something that other people will get something from. Um, you're going to write a story that matters to people, that sticks with them. So thank you so much. Do you
Thank
want
you.
to tell the audience where they can find you so they can follow your journey and see when this book comes out?
Yes, absolutely. I am on LinkedIn, and it's just my name is just Stacy Frankenberg. I'm also on Instagram, and my Instagram is Stacy Frankenberg Writer.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Charles, do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, just as a whole, as a general diagnostic, um, a technical presentation, if for my editorial brain, I would take a chainsaw too, but that sounds violent. Hang on. But you chainsaws get a bad reputation because of horror movies, but really, if you ever seen a chainsaw, people work with it, it's cutting down these really big chunks of a tree or any kind of plant that needs heavy lifting trimming, but the plant is there. So everything here, totally fine. I totally see your vision, totally see what you're after. All the editorial is just plussing and just trimming it, making sure. So that's a solid start because
Yes.
speaking of teaching, for some Lord knows what reason, one one tutoring assignment I had to look at and fix and grade and etc. 3 different students' papers for Antigone, and these were the worst papers I had ever read from 3 different students from 3 different schools. And it was the worst writing I've ever seen. This is not that
Thank
by
you.
far. So when I say
I'm glad to hear
chainsaw,
that.
yeah, when I say chainsaw, this is a good thing. The fact that I know exactly what tool we need is a good thing. So
Well, that's true.
you're solid. You
Yes.
are a solid. You have a solid road paved already. You just gotta follow the road.
Yes.
Thank you so much, guys. I have really enjoyed this. You guys have been so helpful. Like I said, I took so many notes. This has just really been helpful and also just really motivating. So this is very exciting. Thank you so much.
Awesome. That is definitely, as writers and editors, our goal is to just be motivating, not to make you feel overwhelmed, but motivated to make your story the best it can be. Because I know for myself, feeling motivated when you feel like you're so lost in what is already there, and yeah, there's motivation and direction has been huge for me. So I'm very grateful that we were able to help you. Thank you again for sharing, and thank you, audience, for listening, and hopefully you learned something too, and we can all motivate each other together to keep telling stories that matter. So we will see you all next week, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.